Yellowstone National Park, I would argue, is the most well-known of its kind in the world. That can be easily credited to its beautiful forests, diversity of wildlife, and of course, the geysers that spray boiling water such as the Morning Glory Pool. Like a giant rainbow gemstone after being cut open, the multicolored pool was red, green, yellow, and had many attractive shades of blue. Something you would pay a heavy price to see. And yet you get to see it for free. And there is the volcano, a gargantuan underground supervolcano that is active and world-ending if it were to erupt. But you don't actually need to worry yourself about such a thing. We are safe from that. By the time it does explode, humanity will probably be living on other planets, and we may watch the devastation from afar. Or we'll either be extinct from our own destruction or something else not pleasant to think about. But nonetheless, the park is a beautiful part of our world, and I'm sure it is a place to be on bucket lists for most of the American population, and even around the world. Thousands of people all year round come down to visit with their families, friends, or by themselves. People from different states, countries, and continents, all excited faces coming in and leaving visibly satisfied. I was happy watching them come and leave, but now I worry for their safety. Let's bring this back to the beginning. To protect my own identity and the identity of others in this story, I'm going to call myself Michael for now, and the two others involved in this, Sarah and Bob. A bit standard, but alas. We both worked at the park for a few years now, with me and Bob as rangers, and with Sarah, who actually worked at the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory. I got around fine with Bob, and Sarah is my sister-in-law. She actually introduced me to this job opening not long after she married my sister. I was very grateful for that, and now I hope she'll have my back when I tell my family about what happened. It all started about a week and a half ago, with some campers leaving the woods and giving Bob and I odd reports. They said that the overall trip was pleasant, but they were disturbed by some noises they heard. They described it as deep rumbling noises that they felt just as much as they heard. Bob and I had no clue what that meant and chalked it up to their imagination, but soon we heard it as well. A distant and faint, but still very much existing noise. A low rumbling that felt powerful, and soon some campers reported seeing trees in the distance shaking and moving like they were being pushed over. I theorized for a bit that it was a stampeding bison herd, but the frequency of the rumblings didn't match that group of running animals, and I heard what a stampede sounded like, and it did not match at all. I had a strong feeling of what it was, or more specifically, the source was on the tip of my tongue. It's like when you take a test at school, and there's a question that you knew the answer to, but you just couldn't write it down. As it went on, Bob jokingly said, "Maybe it's the volcano," and I laughed with him. But that part of my brain latched onto that, and I began to worry it was the volcano. Tremors and rumblings that would have been picked up by various equipment, like Richter scales, occasionally happen, but not to the extent we would all hear it and shake trees. Not to my own memory, at least, and I was worried the volcano was acting up. I tried to rationalize it as the rumblings being something else. If it was a volcano, more trees would shake and not small sections of them, as the campers described. And if the volcano was acting up, Sarah would have called to inform us, or anyone else from the observatory in case it was something we would be concerned about. Or at least just to calm our nerves on a seismic behavior we had no knowledge of. But that part of my brain wouldn't relax, and I feared the worst. So I took it upon myself to call Sarah and ask. I sighed in relief and felt my heart beat normally as Sarah told me there hadn't been any seismic activity or tremors. In fact, things have actually been relatively calm. Though I was glad to know we weren't under the threat of an eruption, that did mean their source of the noise remained a mystery. After another day of our usual work routine of patrolling the park without going deep into the wilderness, we were interrupted by a rumbling. It was a good distance away, but still as clear as the ether in the geysers. I decided then and there that I was going to get to the bottom of this. Last thing the park needed was something bothering the visitors. After consulting with Bob on the matter, I packed some essentials and decided to use a bike that was made for cycling through forest terrain and made my way deeper into the wilderness. After taking solace that the volcano wasn't behind this, I wasn't as nervous as I went into the wooded areas of the park, and I certainly wasn't afraid of the animals. Deer and coyotes avoided humans. Bison are only dangerous when provoked, and wolves also know that humans are not to be interacted with. We had a bit of a mutual understanding with them. I thought about what the noise could have been. Maybe machinery cutting down trees illegally, or dumb kids partying too hard away from everyone else. After a while, I passed through an empty camping area and stopped to catch my breath. As I did, something loud made me jump. Rumbling again, but not the same. It was far away and lasted longer, and continued still, and soon I could see a wave of brown coming through the trees. It was maybe 100 or so meters away, and I felt my body begin to prepare to flee, as the stampeding bison thundered across a small clearing, all grouped tightly together to protect the young. They stomped and ran down past before turning sharply to the left and went into another section of the forest. I sighed, knowing they weren't heading towards any tourist centers, and I waited for the wolf pack to come into view. But they didn't come. There weren't any wolves anywhere, or anything else that would have caused the bison herd to run. And I knew that they weren't just migrating or moving from one place to another. That was clearly a panicking behavior. They were being chased, but there was no wolf in sight, nor was there a bear that decided to make its appearance in the park. It made me think of other theories behind the other strange recent events. I thought it really was people starting trouble and scaring the wildlife. I pulled out my walkie-talkie at the moment and spoke into it. "Hey Bob, I just saw a herd of bison stampede near one of the camping sites. Clearly panic behavior. Over." A moment passed, and Bob's voice came through.
"Roger that. Were there any wolves or anything chasing them? Over."
"Nothing from what I saw. I think there must be someone or a group of people disturbing the wildlife. I'm gonna go check it out. Over." There was another pause.
"Alright, but be careful. If it seems too dangerous, come back and we can regroup and decide what to do from there. Some visitors could get hurt if this keeps up. Last thing we need is someone being run over by a ton of cattle. Over."
"Roger that," I replied before putting my walkie-talkie away and cycling on, following the direction the bison came, making sure I was going slow and steady. As I traveled deeper, it felt like I was suddenly moving through molasses, like something was slowing me down and telling me to turn back and get away from where I was. My gut turned uneasily, and my mouth felt dry with a sour tinge. Something didn't feel right, and I was beginning to regret this decision. Thoughts of turning back to get Bob so I wouldn't be alone, thoughts of calling the police based on gut feeling, and thoughts of never coming back to this park raced through my mind. But why I had these thoughts, I couldn't even begin to think of an answer for. As I thought this, I broke through the tree line and froze. My hands gripping the handle brakes so tightly and fast that I almost flipped over the bike, Right in front of me was a dead bison. A large dead bison, completely ripped apart. I've seen kills from wolves before, but this wasn't anything like what a normal animal could do. The lower half of the bison was gone, including bits of the front, like it was feasted upon by dozens of animals, but the ground was still wet with blood, telling me it was a recent kill. Flies buzzed about the corpse, bits of what little organs it had left stretched out of the torso, and the bull's face was in a state of shock. That was another detail that was odd. It wasn't a young or elder bull. It was big, and could have easily been in good fighting health before it ended up like this. Not the usual first choice for predators. I stared in horror as I tried to wrap my head around this unexpected gruesome kill. A cold sweat washed down my head and my back as ragged breaths were met by repulsed gagging. The bison wasn't just killed. It was completely brutalized. The only thing that distracted myself from puking was trying to think of what could have possibly happened to this creature. Just then, I turned my gaze up to see a thick trail of blood that started a few meters away from the bison and led into a thicker foliage of trees, like something bleeding walked away from the scene. Or what I soon came to learn, carried. Rumbling. My bones vibrated as it felt like a heavyweight boxer punched my chest. That was much closer than before. And this close, I just managed to pick up an aspect of the rumbling. There was something organic about it. Just as I turned my head up at the beige trees, something caught my eye. There was something in the trees. I didn't know what it was at the time, but it was gigantic, dark brown and black. And though I couldn't see eyes or even a head, I knew it was staring at me. More rumbling. This one was different, sharper, like a cut from an axe, breathy as well. Once the vibrations in my body subsided, I finally recognized the massive thing had growled at me. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn heel, or wheel in this case, and get the hell out of there. And I obeyed them like a drone. I bolted through the park as fast as I could. The trees and plants racing past me in blurs, my legs almost snapping the pedals with how hard I pumped them. Even if I broke the bike, I would just spring up and sprint out of there like I was running for gold. I eventually made it to the main park, threw my bike aside, and burst into the main office, startling Bob. "Close the park!" I remember screaming at him, my heart thundering in my chest, my mouth and throat dry and needing water. "The heck? Why? What happened?" Bob asked, shooting up from his chair. I took a moment to catch my breath, coughing at how parched I was, but managed to find the words. "There's something out there. It killed a bison and it's way too close to the camping sites." "Something? What something?" Bob questioned, confused, but still threw on his coat and adorned his hat, taking me seriously. "I don't know, but it was huge, bigger than anything, and it completely ripped apart a full-grown bull bison." In that moment, I realized how crazy I probably sounded, spurting out words of some giant predator in the woods. But luckily for me, Bob knew me for years, and knew I wouldn't be making something as serious as this up. He looked at me half convinced, half thinking I was confused, but nodded and spoke into his walkie-talkie to the other rangers and park managers about escorting people out and stopping new visitors from entering. The reason he gave was that I had spotted a predator in the woods and it spooked the bison to wander too close to frequently used paths. I let out a sigh of relief, thanking God I didn't come across as completely insane, and sat down, wiping the sweat off my brow, and reached into the bag that I still had on me for some water. For the rest of the day, I spent my time pacing around the room, nervously spying out the window and asking Bob for any updates on the evacuation of the park. He would tell me that all the guests have left, the ones we found at least, and how nothing unusual was spotted. I tried to relax, telling myself to take solace that people were out of harm's way, but the feeling that something was very wrong was unshakable. "Hey, I'm gonna call it a night," Bob said to me as he began to make his way to our shared bedroom. I looked over at him with a feeling of unease. "Now? It's not that late." I asked him, not wanting to be the only one awake. Bob scratched his nose with his finger and hung up his head. "Yeah, and you should probably get some sleep as well. You need it more than I do, actually." I stared at him for a good while, contemplating over his words, and slowly nodded. "Yeah, sure. Okay. Give me a second." Bob nodded back and went to our room, but I didn't follow. He was right. I needed to rest and get some sleep for tomorrow, but I wasn't comfortable having no one to be out on watch in case that thing wandered close by. Whatever it was, I had no idea. But if I really did mistake what could have been some shadow of a regular animal or a group of tightly packed bison moving in the trees, that didn't explain what killed the large bull. Whether it be an animal or a group of sick humans, there was something dangerous out there. I sighed and rubbed my eyes, taking another glance out the window. It was evening, the sun almost set and casting orange hues across the sky. It was quite beautiful, in fact, and I somehow felt my nerves ease. Despite my better judgment, I decided to get some air. But I didn't do anything stupid like stroll through the woods or stand hundreds of meters away from the cabin, no. I just took a few steps outside of the front door that was partially opened, and stood there, taking deep breaths in and out. The crisp air filled my lungs and senses, the tension in my muscles loosened, and mind calmed. The therapeutic effect this park had on me stayed true even now. I was about to go back inside, but I stopped and became still. I suddenly felt very uneasy, and I didn't want to be out here anymore. I gulped and turned to my left to walk back inside, but as I faced that direction, I felt every cell in my body explode with panic, and my blood ran cold. Like a wraith, something had snuck up to stand a few long strides away, likely emerging from the trees behind the cabin, walked past the building, and stopped to look down upon me. Standing still, looming over me and the cabin with its great mass, was a long-thought dead animal. It was insane and incomprehensible to believe to be true, but it was. A T-Rex. A full-grown, gigantic Tyrannosaurus Rex. 4 meters or more at the hip. 13 meters from nose to tail if I were to bet. 10 or likely more tons in weight. The body was dark brown. The top of the animal's neck, back, and tail, a thick black, and even in the low light of the setting sun, I could see orange and tan colors on its massive head. The dinosaur looked down at me with a curious or pitiful expression in its amber-colored eyes. Its nostrils flared to breathe or sniff the air, the small bristles of feathers on its head and neck standing on end before relaxing. I stood there in shock, fear, and awe, feeling like a mortal in the face of a god. As my mind reeled from this impossible reality, my knees began to shake. My heart raced and sweat ran down my head and neck in gallons. I could only stammer before I felt life rush back into me, and I jumped back into the cabin and slammed the door shut with a loud bang. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting over to the window as I gasped out a squeak. The T-Rex had walked up to the window and bowed its head to peer into the cabin, its eyes piercing into mine as I backed away from the window and pressed my back to the wall. It continued to look at me, tilting its head curiously, and I could see the intelligence in its eyes, a gleam of sentience that reflected my own, its pupils a black pool that carried memories of another world far different than mine. It sniffed deeply and opened its mouth, breathing on the glass and fogging it up. But even through the condensation, I could still see its huge serrated teeth. They were long and pointed like railroad spikes, the sight of them making my heart tighten in my chest, and I wanted to puke when I realized what they could do to me. But for a brief moment, my grief-stricken mind actually wondered how I only now just saw its teeth. It seemed it had lips like a lizard, Komodo dragons or something. The Rex could easily smash through the cabin and devour me in one bite if it wanted, and I couldn't tell if it did or not. I begged to whatever was kind enough to grant mercy that I was too small and not worth the effort. But just as I tried to think of ways to escape and get myself and Bob out of there, the T-Rex continued to stare at me for another few seconds before it just casually raised its head and left. The room brightening up now that the sun wasn't blocked out by a colossal predator. I was still clinging to the wall for dear life as it made a sound, a deep hum that vibrated my body like a rumble. And just as I realized the source of that rumbling came from the dinosaur, and this is what had killed the bison, the sound escalated into a long, drawn-out bellow, or a moan, or yawn, or whatever it was. Just a deep, powerful sound. Louder than a wolf's howl, than a bear's roar, louder than anything. The sound from an ancient world that punched me in my chest, and my knees finally collapsed as I curled up into a ball. As the bellow ended and echoed out, Bob burst from the room in his pajamas and asked me what the hell was going on. I didn't answer straight away, and I could remember Bob trying to console me so I could speak to him. But it took a while for me to temporarily push the events from my mind and focus on the then and now. I found myself sitting up on the bed, shaking like a leaf and stuttering out words. When I eventually choked out that there was a Tyrannosaurus Rex in the park, Bob looked at me like I was completely insane. I didn't blame him. What person in their right mind would have it any other way? But luckily for me, he did notice something definitely shake me up, and something had to make that vocalization from before. Maybe not a T-Rex, but definitely a creature or machine that should not be ignored. He left me in the room to make some calls, but to whom I had no idea. Alone in our room, I took out my laptop and began to regale all of this in my docs, my fingers moving at light speed, but my body was still trembling. I took nervous glances out the window at times before closing the curtains and got back to work. After I post this, I will likely call Sarah and tell her everything and hope she'll believe me. I have one finger on the dial button and the other still typing away on the keyboard as I finish this off. To whoever reads this, be careful and warn whoever you can. Stay away from the woods. Barricade your homes. Do not leave unless you absolutely need to, and bring a weapon. The dinosaurs are back. somehow, in some way.